Welcome to Making Room, a podcast inspiring people to accelerate change by being a catalyst, honoring creativity, and acting with courage. We are making room for the greatest potential of our community.
Welcome, you are welcome here. Welcome to this open door, dear. Our hands are reaching out for you. The floor is clear and we've made room for you.
All right, welcome back to Making Room. It's so awesome. We got Makayla Binter here today.
Hello.
Yeah, shining
excited.
bright. I tell you what, that was when I first met you. I think I just heard about you on Instagram. Y'all, you are in for a treat. Like, Makayla is everywhere. We're going to really be focusing today on creativity. And I think you're going to find there's a definition you haven't seen before. There's things I hadn't seen before until I met her. So this is going to be a treat. It's going to be an exciting ride. Makayla's just like, she is like, again, everywhere. She's a muralist. She's a teacher. She's an activist. She's using arts as a creative expression to elevate voices across our community. She is a fellow, come on, Davidson alum. Let's go. It's
There
time
we
for the
go.
fight song. She was an athlete. She was painted part of the Black Lives Matter mural in Spartanburg, South Carolina. She's been a Creed Fellow, Knights Foundation Emerging Cities Champion. So the list goes on and on. But I tell you what, we just got to get right in there today. And Makayla, I think what you do to create space, but also having space as a creative. I just want to go straight in. Recently, your artwork was featured in the Mint Museum.
Yeah.
And you're how old, can I ask?
I'm 23.
That's
23. Take us through the moment you walk into the Mint Museum of Charlotte and you see your artwork hanging on the wall.
So I'll go into like when I actually walked into the gallery. Of course, bringing the works in when the walls were blank and everyone's work was kind of being laid up against the wall. I was like, ooh, this is kind of exciting. Like, I had recognized work from people that obviously I was really close with, like my friends, people I consider my family in the art community. And then also just like a bunch of photographers and artists that I hadn't met yet, but I'd seen on Instagram. And I'm like, wow, wait, this is a huge collection of people. And so I was like, okay, like I can see the vision a little bit. And I'm like, all right, I'm ready for the final opening night. And then once I got there, I was just like, wow. Just, I guess speechless is the best word to describe it. I had walked in and I wasn't really sure where my stuff was going to be placed finally. Like, I knew where about it would be, but not like the final setup. Personally, my favorite wall, of course, is the one with my work on it.
Of course.
But it but it also
As it should
features,
be.
of course, right? But it also features like artist Bree Stallings. It included I think her Owly Mo, I think is her Instagram name, and then also Lavonia Parks. And the way that they set up our wall, well, I guess more directly Carla set up our wall, was just absolutely fantastic. And I was just blown away because not only did it moves so well together, but then also with Owl's work in the background just kind of spoke in a different way and provided a lot of movement across the wall. And so I was just kind of like overshone with overshone. I was just like exuding happiness and like excitement. I was also there by myself too. So when I walked in, I was like, I guess my first like adult moment. I also got to walk in and walked up to the table and they were like, "Are you an artist?" I said, "Yeah." And they're like, "Walk in, go ahead." And I said, VIP. Right. So I know, Mom, I made it. So that was like the night of like, that's how I felt.
That's just like that special moment, right? And we've talked a lot about the importance of space and what you had done though to lead up to that. That's the part I think that when we were talking even this morning preparing is you've put in a body of work, right? At your age, it's incredible. I'm inspired every day just by seeing the different things you do. And I was curious, what is some of the inspiration from growing up, or what really helped cultivate, I'll call that, we talk as a group on Making Room here that there's this artist in each of us. And sometimes in society, people say, oh, you can't do anything being a creative. But what gave you momentum, and what was important to you early on as an artist as you grew up?
Yeah, for sure. So starting in like elementary school and like even into middle school, I had like an adopted grandma, quote unquote, like that one
Right.
older member of the not family, and she painted. And so every time that she was using her tools or her artwork, her books, she would hand me the stuff that she wasn't using or the stuff that she didn't really like to use, and was just like, here, like draw with this or like figure it out. And I'm like, okay. And so not only did she like enable me by like taking me to Michael's and to AC Moore, which is in upstate New York, we would like be in there for hours, literally, of her just being like, well, this is what you use this for, and this is how you use that, and then this is what you do with this. So she would buy me art supplies, sketchbooks, books on like just how to do stuff. And then of course I had fantastic art teachers all the way up into high school, who were just like, you have a gift, you have a talent, and then also just allowing for like that growth and creativity and that curiosity to just kind of like expand. So when I said in high school, like, I want to try spray paint. Okay, here's some spray paint. I want to do this. All right, well, let's think about this a little more. Like, I have a subject in mind. How can we push that further so that we can say something about it? So I remember I took AP art in high school in my senior year, and I wanted to talk about, I think very broadly, I said like, eating disorders. And then she was like, okay, what about him? And so I was like, so it's like trying to figure out not only what it is you're trying to say, but then through your medium, and then also not only how you use it, but then how you express it, what you're trying to say. And then that also went into Davidson of also my professors kind of pushing me on that, of when you're making art and when you're trying to showcase an expression or an emotion you have, what's the best way for you to do that, and what's the best method for you to get that across to other people?
Wow. There's a
That's
lot
so much
there.
there.
I know.
I want to go back to play grandma though, right? Because
Okay.
it strikes me as if she didn't take that time to kind of make room for you to come along with her,
Sure.
you may not even have been an artist, right?
Facts.
So I'm just curious, like, how, if you stayed in touch with her, how does she like looking at you now, like? This, how does it resonate with her? I'm just curious if you
Yeah,
have
for
still have a
sure.
relationship.
So I haven't really spoken to her that much. Actually, my biological grandma has
Yeah.
kind of taken over that place of
Yeah.
just being the one who's like you can be an artist
Right.
and that's okay. She also is. I think she grew up in her teens in like the 70s too. Well, not her teens. Whoop, she's an older adult. But so she also has been the one reaching out and being like, what are you doing? Like, tell me about a project, send me pictures.
That's awesome.
So of course I have that support. And then also the older people within like the Charlotte community in general have
Yeah.
also been like super supportive. I mean, they're not really older. They're like 40, like,
You just
You just hit us all. Hit us all.
right. Well, I'm also
Oh,
thinking
man.
I'm thinking beyond that. Okay, I'm thinking like 60s and 70s.
we're not offended.
No, y'all are not old. I promise.
Mid-career. That's good. I'm good with older.
I'm good with all.
I
And
love
so-
that 'cause- yeah.
Yeah, and knowing that I also have that support from like my 40, 50 plus year old artists who have been in the game for however long, they're also like, we want to make sure you're good, and like you and your other fellow younger artists are good. And so just having that support system has been really important.
Yeah, I totally wrote down the same thing, that this adopted grandmother made room for you, but like in the beginning, I think there's so many people that will say like, oh, like that's just going to create such a mess. Like you're going to create disasters in our house that we're going to have to clean up afterwards. And then there are people that just look out for you, whether they're family or not, that say like, let's encourage this person. I see something in you and let's go with it. Let's see where we can explore it. I love that because it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be someone in your own home.
Right. Exactly. No, it can definitely be the people that are outside of it. And then we also spend so much time in our school system. So if we don't have supportive teachers, then what do we have? But also, I definitely asked my mom if I could paint on the
I
walls.
was going to ask,
Like,
what
don't-
did you mess up as a kid?
Yeah, don't test me. I definitely did it in my childhood home. I was definitely like, can I paint a mural in my room? And she's no,
Absolutely not.
no.
That's great.
Let me put this on the wall. And I love what you said too about that maybe I'll try some spray paint. I'll try this on the wall. And there's a quote from Maya Angelou that we were talking about earlier, and she said, you can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have. And when we talk some too about making room, sometimes in this community, yes, plans are great, strategy, but sometimes people need room to experiment, room to grow, to say, hey, what is this? So when you hear that quote, how has that been part of your journey where you're just, sometimes I feel like, I'll say for me is I get so caught up in what's the end product and the growth is in the process. So how has that been for you?
Okay, I'm going to go to what you just said about process. Process has been huge, I think, especially for me and then also like my students and talking to them. My own process is super fluid. It's very based on emotion, it's space, it's color, it's how I'm feeling that day. And that's both on like an emotional, but also like spiritual and mental level too, is like, how am I exhausted? And then like that changes my color palette, that changes the music I listen to, that changes the book that I'm reading. But to go to the creativity quote, yeah, absolutely. Like, I think about like the more that you experiment and the more that you have like things to try, like trying murals, trying spray paint, trying photography, like, and then having the resources to do it, like digital art included, you just expand the way in which you can express yourself. So it's like, you start off with a process like painting or colored pencil or graphite, which seems like very small, I guess, if you think about it, like a very limited process or a medium to use. But then as you start to experiment, and then you also have the resources and the accessibility to then try more and more things. Like at Davidson, that's where I tried digital art. That's where I tried more spray paint. That's where I did my first mural. So when you're given those like more expansive opportunities, then yeah, like the possibilities just grow. So now that I've tried all of these different things, I'm like, oh, well, this can go anywhere. Like this building can get wrapped. Like, right. You start thinking about just like, you just start to see it all everywhere. And that's something I had a lot of conversations with some of my art friends about too, of just, once your environment starts to become, well, I guess once your art becomes your environment, that's when you know you're in a really beautiful place as a creative.
Well, in that environment, I noticed when you walked in, if you walk in, we're in the Advent co-working space in Queen City Podcast Studio. There's art all over the wall. Everywhere. And as we were going quick, you were pausing, looking around. What did you see when you walked in?
Just like familiar names, like beautiful stuff. I love really complicated pieces of work. And I guess to expand on that, like things that are overlapping, things that may not necessarily relate to one another. Like there were pieces in the hall that had really like intense underlayers of like spray paint and paint markers and like just mark making. I'm like, wow, like look at that texture. But then there's like this bigger piece on top of it. So all of those little tiny things turn into something, into like a full image. And it's just like taking the time to notice and look at that and being like, okay, Mr. Creative over here on this wall, like yes.
So that's great. So in addition to art, because you're used to training and seeing these like details and like appreciating like the intricacies of all these different things, are there things outside of like looking at a piece of art where you're just maybe looking at a group of people or something where you're like, wow, this is how this could work, and it just like translating that creativity from the actual art space to something else beyond just what people traditionally think is art?
Yeah. And your question made me think of like sports.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking about as a heptathlete and a pentathlete, you have like
that
five.
wasn't on the bio.
Yeah.
I thought you ran track, but what?
Yeah, like
That's
so
great.
I'm thinking about like 5 to 7 events. You do it all in either a day or a weekend.
Okay.
And the movements are all essentially very similar to each other.
Okay.
Like they're just very similar.
Right.
And so it's how you train for hurdles is ultimately going to connect to how you train for long jump, and then how you train for high jump, and then how javelin hip motion works with shot put. And then, so like it just like all the intricacies of each event, and then how they tie together to then allow you to put on this either really great or maybe not so great pentathlon, heptathlon. And so when I think about like just like creativity and art in like a space that's not necessarily artistic, I just think about like bodies So I'm thinking about like athletes and the way that we can and are like have trained ourselves to move is actually really beautiful. So I don't know if you guys have ever watched like slow motion videos of like runners, sprinters, like hurdlers, whatever. They're just so beautiful because we're not only thinking about like how our body balances itself as we're running, as we're hurdling, as we're high jumping. So you know that like this arm has to be in this spot so this leg can go over at this time and we can get over the hurdle. So I'm just thinking about like how all of those minute movements are essentially so individually like exact and precise, but then together create this very fluid or often super fast event.
Just flowing together.
Yeah.
Well, it actually reminds me of the story of the book Boys in the Boat, and it's about the 1936 Olympic gold medal crew team. And what was so interesting, it was this like ragtag group of rowers from Washington. No one thought they were anything, but they worked so hard for each other. And in the book, the author talked about that actually races aren't won by a group of clones, they're won by crews. And I think when we think about creativity is that sometimes we think, oh, I just wish everyone saw it the same way. And to your point about athletes and this gold medal team, what made them special was some of the rowers had longer arms, some had shorter arms, some had longer or shorter backs. And instead of trying to make each other the same, they embraced each other's strengths and different skills. And when we look at creativity as this way of seeing, earlier you talked about it gives people also a chance to say something about an issue, right? And Shivani, we talked about that, a little time ago, just how does, whether it's murals or projects, how does it bring people together to have tougher conversations? And I'd love for you to be able to share about the mural project at Davidson College, and particularly what issues that amplified and how that sometimes that art is this access to tougher,
Absolutely.
it creates the space, right?
How it would be different than like if people were just in a conference room together talking and having that conversation about a nebulous topic.
No, absolutely. So I'm going to go, my thought process went to actually like a year ago after George Floyd's death, a lot of different like articles and book lists and this, that, and the other were released for people to read and just be like, hey, here's how you can increase your awareness for BIPOC communities. And I was just like, dang, like this is a lot of reading. And like just like I'm looking at these book lists and I'm like, these are like 30 books long. And then just like our access to books in general. And like if you even have like a library in your neighborhood or in walking distance or just the whole nine, I'm like, this is a lot of reading. I'm like, I wonder if there's a way for like the same conversations to be had, but just like maybe potentially in a more accessible and visual way for our different learners that we have. Because I know that I read many books in short stints. So like it takes me a long time to read books, but I end up reading like 5 at the same time. But art, you can look at it, you can process sort of, depending on what it is that you're looking at, but then you can also walk away and then like still hold this image in your mind. And then you end up thinking about it, or maybe it comes up like later on, like you see something visually that kind of reminds you of it and then it comes back up again. You're like, like I'm still like, we're continuously processing this kind of stuff. We're also very visual creatures. Like we rely a lot on our sight. So then also trying to connect that too. But the mural panel project at Davidson, came up when we had 2 neo-Nazis removed from campus, and we had like different meetings and stuff like surrounding not only our Black community, but then also just like our different communities of color, our religious communities. Like everybody kind of just came together and was like, whoa, first of all, this is ridiculous. 1, 2, how can we feel safe on campus, or at least allow space for each other to feel unsafe, but then be in a space to then talk about it and be okay. And so a rally was hosted like later, like the next day, and a mic was open and people just came up and were talking about like how angry they were, how sad they were, how they were afraid to walk on campus, like things like that. And obviously, as a Davidson student, I was just like, dang, like our students shouldn't be feeling this way. 1, and then 2, I was just like, this kind of reminds me of a conversation that we had in 2016 when Keith Lamont Scott was killed.
Right.
So I'm like, like how much has actually changed? How like where have we gone from there to now? And then like how's it any different? Is it different? And I was like, do you know what'd be really cool? I was sitting across from one of my she was my boss at the time, the director of arts and creative engagement at Davidson. I was like, do you know what would be really cool if we just had like an art response wall where people could just like talk about their emotions and like write stuff down and draw. But then the ultimate goal is to just like foster this kind of like anonymous conversation about just like race and equity and justice in our community, but then also outside of it, because Davidson is a bubble. So she was like, let's get it done. I was like, okay. So here we are, like a year or so later. I fill out this grant. I get $10,000 to then create these 2 panels. Each of them that are double-sided, so there's 4 in total. Each of them addressing a different issue that my Davidson community of students, faculty, staff, and alumni not dictated, but like decided that like we needed to discuss a lot more, which ended up being classism, racism, homophobia, and colorism. And so from there, I took those subjects and then I did like some research in the archives at Davidson, created these preliminary drawings, and then I asked a Davidson student, an alumni who graduated in 2015, to come back, and then another Davidson student to help me paint these murals. And then there was Blackboard space that allowed for people to write and interact with the art, but then also like questions to respond to as they were thinking about it. They also had playlists corresponding with each side that I made, and then like a list of books that I used as inspiration, but not just like word books, but like books about artists, about poets, about photographers who did work based on those subjects. And as I'm speaking, I am losing track of the original question. And so I'm just going to stop.
Well,
That's
there's
an
something.
incredible body of
Yeah.
work that was done and put into that, and I love the like interactivity of creating an anonymous space and where art almost continues to transform because you have other people that are also contributing to it, and then allowing it to create a voice or a message. So we kind of were talking about having difficult conversations and how you use art as a platform to do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah, no, that was spot on what Shivani said, which is, it strikes me as, I think we were experiencing some of those, and share being African American with you. Like after George Floyd, a lot of people have these confidential conversations, especially our friends who may be white, and say, hey man, I don't know what to, like, should I be colorblind? Should I be anti-racist? I have no idea. And I'm kind of like, well, I haven't read the 30 book long list, so I don't really know exactly what to tell you right now. I was like, I know it when I see it, and Lloyd helped them walk through it. But I do like the idea that art was a way of like this expression where you may not have the words to be able to say like how you're feeling or like, hey, I want to support, but visually you can do that. And so one of the things Shivani and I talk about just having kids is like, we don't have to teach them to be creative. Like they're just naturally creative. And all the work, like the schoolwork in preschool that comes home, it's all artwork for the most part. And so at what point do we like stifle that? But it's something that we all naturally have and bring it out. So I like the idea. I see your face glowing, so maybe I'll stop talking.
It's just you brought up a great point about our education system.
You can get us in trouble.
How it stifles creativity. I've talked about this a lot with my social justice class. Well, I mean, not like this subject per se, but just the idea that like when we're entering into school systems, especially ones that involve college prep, it's ultimately about the end product and not the process, right? Like going back to that idea. And it's not necessarily about how creatively can you think to solve a problem. It's more like, can you retain this information enough to then regurgitate it on a test? And that goes back into like SATs, ACTs, standardized testing, the whole nine. And so when students are given, or like not given, but like when they have an opportunity to like, what I told them is like taking agency over your own education, they have no idea what to do with it. Like they really don't. Like I asked, I'm like, hey, can y'all, I'm going to give you guys some options. I'm like, let's be creative. Like, let's think a little bit about this. I gave it to them, and I'm like, so I want y'all to choose, like, tell me what it is that you're thinking. And they were all just kind of like, well, you're the teacher here, so can you can make the decision. I'm like, what? No, boo, boo.
You're ready to let them rock and roll.
They
Like,
don't know how to do that anymore.
they
Yeah,
don't.
right.
And then even in art classes, they struggle with like process. They struggle with like their sketchbooks. They struggle with like thinking through their ideas, and then also trying to discuss like what it is that idea then says in a larger conversation. Granted, we learn how to do that in college usually. Like that's where I learned how to have your current academic studies, questions, hypotheses, and how they interact with the larger conversation outside of just this one college institution. But I'm just like, come on, y'all. Like, let's think a little bit outside of the box here and not be afraid of the outcomes that may come of that.
And I think that's, it brings up to me that the idea of expression, especially in communities, whether age, whether it's background, ethnicity, how much there's I forget who said it, but someone talked about the different forms of oppression. And one of the worst forms of oppression is the oppression of hope, the oppression of voice and expression. And how part of, I think, what you're doing when you create those murals that you were touching on this, Brandon, is it's healing to have expression. And one of the projects that I was just working on with Schools Reimagined was students, having a chance to say what they want. I've been trained as a leadership facilitator to cultivate your voice and mindset and all these things. And I feel like that's one form of development. But to me, what is a whole nother form that we could really tap into in this community is developing through expressing. And to not have to, if people have room to express what they say. And I'm curious, what did you see during that mural project as people were putting things up on the wall? What did you notice in their body, or what did you notice around this idea of healing and saying what they want, and then maybe change is happening? So just curious what you saw.
Yeah. Sometimes I would post up nearby, like just enough, just so I could like just look around and, I see so-and-so has been standing there for a little bit. I wonder if they're going to write anything, like stuff like that. So it's kind of like a giant social experiment from my mind. A lot of people actually ended up speaking a lot of truths on those panels. So like for the classism side, there were statistics for students that didn't have money to pay for their next meal, like in their actual bank accounts. The percentage of people that are in the top 1% economically at Davidson, income of the neighborhood that Davidson College lives in, and then also the prices of the houses nearby. On the colorism and the racism side, people were talking about just like experiences of being Black or of color on campus. So people were talking about when white students say the N-word during a song, when what else was brought up? Oh, somebody else wrote about like their experience as like a Black woman. Like it's really hard to be a Black woman at Davidson. And so then all of a sudden you start seeing like these interactions between comments, obviously. Like people are writing stuff, arrows are being made, people are erasing stuff. And I'm like, wow.
Like some dialogue happening
story,
in
yeah.
between.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
great.
And like the anonymous like people who are adding to this wall are now like in open dialogue with each other on a campus that's open to the entire community. So not only are Davidson students seeing it, but then also like parents, elderly people, children are like, now they can not only add to it, but then also like see.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, and when you have done that, just that dialogue, and to me, that was one of the first things I know when all of us got connected with you. I was struck by the way your art and just you as a person are this bridge for dialogue and bridge to different generations, bridge to different ways of seeing in the world. And I read this quote from a famous photographer, Gordon Parks, and he says, "I feel it is the heart, not the eye, that should determine the content of the photograph. What the eye sees is its own. What the heart can perceive is a very different matter." And I'll say for me, I felt that's one of your gifts. And I'm going to put two of you all, you and Brandon, on the spot a little bit because he is actually wearing
I am.
a piece of his artwork. And I want to take it back to that was something when he had been a really important person in my life. I wanted to honor the support and creativity that he had been. And so I knew that your heart expressing on your canvas, which you also do shoes, would be really meaningful. So I'd love to hear first from what that process was like. And then Brandon, when we met you in the parking lot that day with your son and you got that pair of shoes, what that was like.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Okay, so
You
I'll
get to
go
go
first.
first.
Okay.
I did dress the part, though. I did dress the part.
Dress her on.
And for those watching on YouTube, if you could just show
I'll
them up,
put them up.
and so.
Here we
Put them on
go.
Brian's table.
There we go. Put it on Brian's table.
Process wise, I kind of struggled a little bit. I'm not gonna lie because I try to make my shoes different every time I make a pair of shoes. Like I don't want somebody to walk around with a pair of like Makayla Binter shoes and be like, "Oh, my shoes look kind of like that." No, boo, that's lame. So I was like, okay, how can I make these different, but also still like super dope, something you'd actually want to wear, and then also like fitting for like the energy and the vibe that I got from John. And so I was like, all right, so I started with some colors and some blocks and like blocking out the shoes. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm onto something. And I just like, yeah, like
I am good at this.
no, actually,
I'm
like
kidding.
that's a whole
Yeah,
mood. That's a whole mood. Like literally after almost everything I do, there's always a moment of like, dang, like I paint. That's crazy. Like that came from my brain and now it exists. And so like kind of a similar process of just like layering and then how can I make these like cool looking, not super complex, but also like energetic and like in motion almost constantly. So like as I don't know if y'all saw, but like there's white lines that like lead you across the entire shoe. Go ahead.
I would take my shoes off. I can't guarantee that there's not a smell in the room, but I will show. I will show. I will
Yes,
show.
yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
Luckily, we're just our audience is listening and not smelling.
There's like there's just consistent movement that leads you like across the entire shoe. And then also I'm a real big like perspectives person. So like whenever you're looking at the shoe, you want to be able to see it from differently, basically anytime you see them. So the opposite, like I guess the outsides of the shoes are different on either side. They're just opposite of each other. So it was actually kind of cool to watch you just standing in them because I was like, it works.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
It works.
That's great. That's great. Well, I would say for me, well, first of all, thank you. This is amazing project, and John, thank you for putting it together. Without him, so we had talked about, and he's mentioned a little bit on this podcast that I wanted to be an artist when I grew up, and the opposite of yours, which I'm sure we'll debrief at some point, is I got the opposite. I didn't have that grandmother who said, "Oh, do this. You need to do this." I got the, "How are you going to pay the bills with that?"
Yep.
And so I feel like I've suppressed that for a while. And so recently I've gotten back in it, and John has encouraged me to get out there. And so I think he could have picked a number of ways to thank me for whatever he thought I may have done for him, although I just kind of told him to get out of his own way. I think he could thank me in a lot of different ways, but I don't think there's a more impactful way, because when you think about it, you touch on something that I have had in me since I was a child, being art. You don't even know this, but one of my first art projects I remember, I painted, I colored and drew all the shoes that I wanted that my parents wouldn't let me. So it's like Jordan 11s, black and red, and like the Grant Hills. Like I had this picture of all like the shoes from that time. And so that merged with that. You connected with my wife to figure out exactly what I would like. So when and then John giving it to me and surprising him with me, with my son who got to see it and was like, I remember he talked about your mask that you designed. He was like, "Oh, that's a cool mask." That mask. So every time now, like I see this artwork, like I think about someone actually spent the time to represent me in this design, and I see you as a creative, kind of the me that I thought I probably could have become, right, if I didn't go down this other path. I see John and sort of what our relationship is. I see my wife supporting, and I see my son, and so it's really, I mean, like you said, you can't express that in words or any other medium, right? Like you can't express that with a gift card. or a card from Hallmark. So it's just, it means a lot to me.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and I think to for that to come alive. I do remember your son that day as well. You know, you just hit him being excited. Let me see them, and just I think what that can mean for his creativity
Right.
and you know. So there are shoes, and Makayla, we'd love to know what else for people listening. You know, what are the kind of opportunities that make your heart sing? What are the projects and collaborations? And Brandon, love to hear. I know you're the connectivity guy, so just curious, what for you, Makayla, what's something you're excited about now, and then what do you want to be doing more of that people listening who might want to be making room could create some space for?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna run through my schedule in my head, and just say it out loud. So I have coming up. I'm doing a project with the Charlotte Museum of History, and they're doing a thing called Path of Portraits. And so I was given the bio of a famous Charlottean. I got Ishmael Titus. He actually I haven't read his full bio yet, but he was once enslaved, I believe, but then he became a free man and then also entered the service of some sort. And there's no pictures of him. There are no anythings of him. So they were like, yeah, like read it, talk to the historian that like gave him to you, and draw him. And I was like, oh, okay. Cool. But like, I'm really excited about that. I'm working with the Harvey Gantt on a couple of things. One for their opening weekend in June. And then their other, I'm having a family first, like, workshop. So I'm going to teach people how to do contour drawings. And so that's going to be in July. I have a mural that I was just selected for with the Crestdale Heritage Trail, which is a predominantly Black community in Matthews. So that's really exciting. I'm actually super duper excited for that one. What else is going on? I have a pop-up art event that's coming up. It's a community cleanup and art event. I'm in the process of planning that, and that'll be on Beattiesford Road. I'll be street painting along with two other artists, Denier Davis and Frankie Zombie, with the help of like Ricky Singh. It'll be in front of the Doobie Shop School of Cosmetology, so that's going to be really awesome. And then because of my two fellowships with Creed and the Knights Foundation, that one pop-up art event will continue on throughout the summer in collaboration with my other fellows. But then the Knights Foundation grant that I got, I'll be working on that too. Wow. So hopefully we're painting a basketball court. That is the end product. That is the end. Wow. That is the end
That's
goal.
Incredible.
We will see. But
when do you sleep?
Yeah, right? I sleep. I promise.
Yeah.
I knocked out. John can tell you. I knocked out yesterday at like 6 p.m.
So John mentioned the connector guy, and I'm actually going to connect with Shivani on this question because, you know, it just struck by. So we started with the Mint Museum. You're talking about Beattiesford, the Doobie Shop, basketball courts, Charlotte Museum of History. These are like polar opposites in terms of spaces in Charlotte the people who usually visit those spaces are represented in spaces.
You are able to speak to so many voices and to so many spaces as well. And part of that comes from like your own story and your own journey, obviously. But how are you able to bridge those conversations? And is there stuff that we don't know about yourself that you as a Charlotte artist maybe we don't see or that people don't necessarily understand, and how you're able to take that in your own story and bring it to the table as you're working on the community art scene?
Sure. I think what I'm thinking about the most are like, I guess my own individual identities. I'm cisgender, I'm female, heterosexual woman, like Black woman, but I'm also biracial. And so like with this light skin tone, I know what it's like going into Black communities and also potentially getting like a side eye of just like, you don't live here, so like, what are you doing here? And so I definitely try to do my research. I'm not sure if I'm actually answering your question, but I like try to do my research and also take consistent survey of just like myself and how I enter spaces, because I know that it's extremely important. Like representation is huge, and that's like what I speak on the most. Like I'm never not gonna paint Black people because it doesn't happen enough. And also our community members in Charlotte just aren't represented in these big art spaces. So like they're not seen in the Mint Museum, or at least like they weren't when I was looking at them. Like they're not seen there. The Levine, like the McCall Center, like they're just not seen in these like spaces, and there's not access or proximity that would even foster a connection to them. So it's like, how can arts be brought to people, but then how can the art then be brought to new people, so that the work that was once either created or developed in a space like on Beatty's Ford Road, how can that then interact with people at the Levine, or like people that have memberships to the Blumenthal? Like, how can those two communities be bridges to foster a conversation, a larger conversation of like how creativity is used in Charlotte. I also think about for streets and for murals, like the intentionality behind what we're making. So this has been a consistent conversation with like Ricky that we've been having. It's just like, how can the murals that we make be not only representations of like the people that we're making them for, but then also tell a larger story of like how art is functioning in Charlotte, not only as this creative hub, but then also being used to quite literally like wash away history. So like, how can it be both inviting to those that it may not reflect, but then also impactful enough to those that it does?
Yeah, well, I think in this moment, I think those larger institutions like the Mint Museum, the Beckler and McCall, I think they're almost probably starving to get more of sort of depiction and plug into these audience like you. And so I think you are at the right time and the person to do it. So keep powering ahead for sure.
Doing my best.
Sure.
Well, I love that, because I think the more representation, the more ways of seeing, the more like we talk about this idea even of making room when you, let's say you do have a space, or let's say you do have an opportunity and you're the quote person that makes the room, that person that you're working with then also makes room for you to expand, right? I've learned so much from getting to know Shivani and Brandon and you, and I think we tend to sometimes think, well, I've got to stop, this is work, but it is, and it like actually works, right? It's the kind of the world we all want to live in, and we look forward to, continuing to be a champion and a cheerleader for the work that you're doing, and hopefully people listening today can engage with you further. So if they did, where can people find you online and on social?
Yeah. So I have a website, MakaylaBinter.com. And then I also have my Instagram at MKAY_15. And I was signed by Elder Gallery. Oh, I didn't even talk about that, but whatever.
Wait, this fall, tell us real quick, right? There's an exhibit.
Yeah, this fall I have my upcoming solo show at the Elder Gallery of Contemporary Art called Who Are Your People? It'll be upstairs, and it'll be a nice little remix of the work I do in photography, but have a combination of like photographs and paintings, and potentially a live performance.
Whoa, by me? Oh, wait, I didn't get that call. I didn't get the call.
We might want to
Shivani.
stifle that creativity.
Now, Shivani can sing.
She can.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, we're already pushing the envelope with the podcast.
Baby
Get me on the mic
steps,
for other
baby
reasons.
steps. Well,
Baby
I
steps.
tell you what, we'll put all that in the show notes. I think it'd be awesome to have, people listening come there.
We really are everywhere. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I'm really trying.
It is, it's amazing, and we just hope you continue to do what you're doing. And in the spirit of closing us out today, we want to give you the last minute. We'll call it just a chance when you think about either creativity, this idea of making room, and what you heard today. What's some closing thoughts? And you can express it verbally or how you might put things on a canvas, however you want, but you have the last minute on anything you want to close out today with.
Okay, on making room and creativity. Well, I think they just connect together in the sense of like you have to make room for creativity, right? Like it's something you have to actively do. You're not always going to be able to be like enabled by the people around you to do work. And so sometimes it's like, how can I do this for myself and foster that space for me? So like I had to do that at some points because my friends would be like, oh, like you're just gonna go in your studio and like do whatever. Like I have this econ paper to work on and you're just drawing. It's like, hey, hey, this drawing that I'm doing is ultimately going to turn into like a large scale canvas piece. And so sometimes like people aren't always going to understand the room that you make for yourself. But it's like, I guess for me, it's become having the confidence to say like, nah, this is what I do. And I'm proud of the work that I make. I was telling John earlier today that I created a studio space in my studio. It's literally an art corner. And I have been like, if I'm going to do the work that I say I'm going to do this summer on these canvases, and I need to physically make that space for myself and be okay with being alone. So I've been doing a lot of solo trips. And that actually is something I got from the Artist Way, as I started taking myself on art dates. And those art dates have included literally sitting outside and drawing. So sometimes you just got to make your own room.
Woo!
I love it.
Wait, we just dropped the mic
Drop the
right
mic.
there.
I think
Thank
she
you
dropped
for
the
that.
mic on
Thank
that
you
one.
so much, Makayla.
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Makayla.
No,
It was
thank
such
you
a
guys.
pleasure having you.
No, this is cool. Appreciate it.
We invite you to continue making room with us. You'll find this episode and all of our exciting and meaningful conversations on Apple, Spotify, or really anywhere you choose to listen to podcasts.
Join the Making Room movement and get more info at makingroomwithus.com or follow us on Instagram at Making Room With Us.
Thank you for showing up for us and each other. Until next time.
You are wonderful and full of truth, just as you are. You are wonderful, so full of truth, just as you are. You are wonderful, so full of truth, just as you are, just as you are. You're welcome here, just as you are.